Now I'd like for us to cover that which maybe isn't that wonderfully ideal. So I want to share the screen. And jump to a PowerPoint. So you'll remember that the broad structure is that we have Palamon and Arcita competing for the hand of Emily. And Theseus is the one who will rule over them and decide things. And then we have a second level where Emily worships Diana, Palamon worships Venus, Arcita worships Mars. So let's jump to the Knight's Tale, particularly courtly love. Let's see if there's some things where it's not ideal. So on line 2281, you'll remember the context is each of these temples were built to honor these gods before the big tournament. The tournament stadium was built. Sure, the Big Ten and the Pac-12 canceled, but the stadium is there. That joke won't make sense if there's a video of this in 2 years, but and it's not funny now, so it has a double bonus to it. So this is Emily getting ready to perform a sacrifice at Diana's temple. Remember, her purpose is to ask Diana, can I please not have to marry either one of these dudes? And last time we talked about the fact that it's not ideal courtly love because it takes absolutely no consideration into her point of view, what she wants. So on the wall temple, it says, or just before she sacrifices to the goddess Diana, ultimately Diana is going to tell her, sorry, you got to marry one of them, but you will marry the one who loves you the most. So the knight is describing this and says, so she is at the temple, and she is, hi Martha Grace, you okay? Is anyone, Martha Grace, is anyone in the classroom? Okay, there we go. So here we have Emily performing a sacrifice at Diana's temple. And it says, this Emily with an elegant heart washed her body in the water of a holy well. But exactly how she did that and how she looked when she was washing her naked body, I'm not going to go into that. I dare not tell you that. But I can only talk in general ways, and yet it would be awesome to go into detail while she's bathing naked. Any problems with an ideal knight sort of leering at her nakedness? Is that courtly love? I'm just asking a few questions. And then we have the moment that Arcita wins the battle. And you've got to understand that up to this point, Emily has not looked favorably on either knight. But the split second one of them wins the tournament, she is immediately married to him. And so she's not looking favorable on either knight. And then Arcita wins. And so that means they're married, right, in this context. And he is enjoying his triumph, and he's riding around in a circle. And as he's riding, he's always turning his head so that he's looking at Emily. And for the first time, we see Emily look on Arcita as her husband, because she didn't want any of this. She's trying to emotionally adapt. And this is what the knight says about Emily and her intentions. This fierce Arcita had taken down his helmet, and he was riding around on his horse, on his courser, so he could show his face to the crowd. And he pricked his steed. He what would we say, used his spurs on his horse to go all the way from one end of the stadium to the other, the very large place, always turning his head, looking upward in honor of Emily. And she, in return, for the first time, cast a friendly, loving eye upon him. Well, not reading the next lines, why would you imagine that she's actually looking at him with fondness? If you were her.
Because he's a winner.
Okay, well that's the knight.
Is it because she feels?
Is it because what?
Is it because she feels like she has to?
Because she has
Because
to.
she feels like she has to.
She's now married to the guy. And she's trying to make the best of a situation. So since she's married to the guy, she's trying to smile at him. This should be a moment where we feel sorry for her. But the knight degrades and ridicules her. So she looked back at him in a warm manner, friendly eye. For we all know this to be true in general, that women are just gold diggers. They're just always going to go after the winner because that's how they are. I'm just asking the question. That's the knight saying that, the speaker. Is that courtly love? I'm just asking, is that putting ladies up on a goddess pedestal? Okay, let's look at this. And this is actually pretty good, but I'm setting it up for the next bit too. Well, let's go back. So one question we have to ask ourselves is, if he's not exactly portraying ideal courtly love, why not? What is he doing? What's the knight's motivation? Why is he telling the story this way? So let's look at the next thing, which is chivalry. Now, you have to understand that chivalry is not just the honor code of knights, but its basic structure is warfare, is battle, is winning. It is a code of conduct, but it is a code of conduct about warfare. And so warfare is thought to be glorious. Warfare is thought to be honorable. It's to have rules, etiquette. But its basic heart is go kill something and look good doing it, right? So we get a description of the Temple of Venus. And it's just what you might expect. It's the good things about love, the bad things about love. It is a broad and good picture about love. First, in the Temple of Venus, you might see inscribed on the wall, for full piteous to behold, the inability to sleep. You know, when you're in love, you can't sleep. The sighs cold. When you're in love, all you do is sigh. Oh, I wish I were with my lover. The sacred tears and the wallowing. The fiery strokes of passion that love's servants, Venus's servants in this life have to endure. The oaths that they make sure they get their love. Pleasance and hope, desire, foolhardiness, beauty and youth, sexual buttery, nice clothes, charms, force, flattery, jealousy. So this seems to be a fair depiction of Venus, both sides, good and bad, right? But notice what happens when we go to the Temple of Mars. This is a dedication. This one is to courtly love. The next one should be a dedication to chivalry. So we might expect the good and bad, shining helmets and glorious colored flags, and right? But also the bad. But let's see what it says. I saw the dark, what would we say? The dark fantasies of felony and all that encompasses, of cruel anger, red as any hot poker, the pickpocket and pale dread, the guy smiling with the knife under his cloak, the sheep on fire burning with black smoke, the treason person murdering someone in the bed, the open war, the bloody wounds, the bloody knife, the sharp menace, the slayer of himself I saw there, the suicide. His heart blood was shooting up in a squirt up into his own hair because the nail he had driven through his forehead. The cold death with his mouth gaping upright. How would you classify these?
Pretty dark.
Horribly dark, no light, nothing good, and worse than that, not even related to war. So what does a pickpocket have to do with war and chivalry? What does someone taking a stake and running it through their forehead so that there's a squirt of blood in their hair? So he associates war, the knight does, with everything bad, evil, wicked, and horrifying. And he's just come back from the Crusades. He hasn't even changed his armor. So what might that mean? Is he writing out of his own experience of the crusade? Does he not see chivalry as ideal? Is he anti-war? There was, in fact, an anti-war movement at the time that Chaucer wrote. Is he just suffering from PTSD? Or what the crap? But this is not high chivalry. And then we have Arcita's death speech. He's laying there. So he's had his victory lap. But while he's having his victory lap, I'm not sure, I've read the passage 100 times, there appears to be a lightning bolt and an earthquake. And his horse rears up on him, falls over, and the pommel of his saddle, you know the pommel, which is the little thing you hold, it pierces right through his breast cage and shoves into his heart. So he's laying there bleeding out. They pick him up and they take him to church, meaning, well, the knight says, just take him straight to church. Take him straight to the graveyard. But they lay him out on a table and he gets to have his Shakespearean death speech, which is really long. So he's looking up to all of them around him and he says, since my life may no longer endure, alas, all my woe, alas, these horrible pains that I have suffered for you, Emily, and suffered for so long. Alas, my death. Alas, my Emily. Alas, the parting of our company. Alas, the queen of my heart. Alas, my wife, my heart's lady, and the ender of my life. What is this world? What does it want from us? One moment a man is with his love, and the next moment in his cold grave, alone, without anyone with him. Farewell, my sweet enemy, my Emily. And gently take me in your two arms for the love of God and listen to what I have to say. I have here with me my cousin Palamon. He's a good man. If ever you marry again, consider him. There is something noble and chivalrous about this, that in his death he lays down his ancient grudge, and he and Palamon again in a way are not brothers, but there's a respect there, there's a love. And if ever you should be a wife, forget not Palamon, he's a noble man. And with that word his speech began to fail, and from his feet all the way up to his chest, the cold of death began creeping over him. For in his both of his arms, his vital strength had slipped away and was gone. Only the intellect, nothing more, that dwelled in his heart. Everything else began to fail, and his heart started to feel death. Both of his eyes went dark, and his breath began to come in ragged gasps. And yet, on his Lady Emily, he looked up and he cast his eyes. And his last words were, "Mercy, Emily." In his last breath, he is giving homage to his goddess, asking for her mercy, to love him, to remember him. But it's also the French word merci. Thanks for everything, Emily. And exactly what would he be thankful for? She did nothing. She never had a relationship with him. But for the man of courtly love, it is pursuing the goddess that is a main part of courtly love. And at the very least, as he passes from this world, we can say that they were married, that he did achieve his goddess. I don't care who you are, that's powerful writing. I don't care what century you're in. That's pretty good. Now let's talk about religion. Ostensibly, the knight is an ideal Christian. And yet, there are times in the story when destiny or fate will come in, several times. For example, Palamon and Arcita. So let's think about this series of events. Arcita is really in disguise as Emily's page. He doesn't need to be in disguise, really. His face is so changed because of the effects of courtly love and pining for Emily. So that when he comes to serve in her court, she doesn't recognize him. I'm not sure she knew really much who he was anyway, except that one encounter. But he gets to be near her, but he can't have her because he's just a page. And he's in disguise for a long time, years. And he's never told anyone that he's in fact Arcita. Because to be Arcita in Athens is a death penalty. But he risks it to be near Emily. But he wants to say out loud, I'm really Arcita. It's burning within him. So he just picks a certain day and he wanders in the wilderness. And he stands near a forest and he just says, I am really Arcita. Now back up a little bit. Palamon has been in prison all these years. And when you're in prison in the Middle Ages to someone who's not mistreating you, your prisoner becomes your new liege lord and you owe your chivalry to him and you, on your honor, are not supposed to escape. Well, Palamon breaks his honor just like Arcita did by coming back into Athens. And Palamon escapes. And to get away, he wanders into the wilderness and he's hiding behind a bush. It just so happens, what are the odds, that Palamon is behind a bush that Arcita happens to walk up next to and says aloud, "My name is really Arcita," thinking no one's around. Those odds seem a little bit astronomical. What are the odds on the same day after years they meet, 3 feet apart, and Arcita reveals himself, right? Not, verbally, right? So normally we would say that's bad plotting. That's not a good plot. It's not an Aristotelian causal plot. It's an episodic plot. There's not a cause between them. Why would that happen? Well, every time there's a weakness in the plot, the knight says, "Destiny, fate. Fate did it," right? So the two of them decide to fight, so they get armor and they come back the next day. They're going to stand there and fight. And it just so happens a deer runs by them in the middle of their fight, and they stop and watch it go by. Why did that deer happen right by there at that time? Well, it happens to be being chased by Theseus and a hunting party. Why do they happen to be there? It's fate, right? Again, episodic plot. So this is the knight in his discussion of fate or destiny. Destiny is the general administrator that executes everything in this world under the purveyance of God. So it's so strong that if something couldn't possibly happen in 1,000 years, that it could happen if destiny wanted it to happen. And all this is ruled by the sight above, under God. So in the Christian scheme, someone explain to me what's the role of fate?
Isn't it like God's purpose or how something happens?
Okay, in the Christian scheme, there is a thing that,
Sovereignty?
I'm sorry?
Is it sovereignty?
Yes,
Of God?
good. It's called the sovereignty of God. Later on in the Reformation, they referred to it as predestination. But that's not fate or destiny. What exactly is fate? What religious system is it? Is it even Christian?
It's more philosophical. It would be like determinism.
Yes, it begins in, at least that I know of, in ancient Greece. And it's a different theological system. But what he has done is said there's God, then there's fate, destiny, and God's really in charge, but it's fate, it's destiny. Does that make sense? But I'm not sure about that theology so much, but at least he throws the Christian God in there. So when Arcita was in Thebes mourning about the fact that he wasn't even an eye shot of Emily, who was back in Athens, he doesn't know what to do, and a god shows up, Mercury, and he gives this prophecy to Arcita. To Athens you shall go, and that will cause you to have an end to your pain. All of your woe will go away. So the gods intervene, and what is the meaning of that prophecy? Why will Arcita's pain go away?
Because he's going to die.
Because he's going to die a hideous and agonizing death. That's the role of religion in this story, to lure you in to your own death with the promise of hopeful love. Is that a good view of religion? I'm just asking questions here. Next, right after Arcita dies, it says this. His last word was, "Mercy, Emily." His spirit left his body and went somewhere else. I don't know where it went. I never went there. So I can't really tell you where. So I'm going to stop. You know, I'm not a theologian. I don't, in my original source, find anything that says where souls go when they die. So I'm not going to interject any kind of opinion here where souls go after they die. Arcita's body's cold, and there we go. Arcita is rotten, starting to deteriorate. That's what we got. Any problems with that from the ideal Christian?
There's a heaven and a hell.
Yeah, in medieval terms, there's exactly 3 places a soul goes: heaven, hell, or purgatory. But he doesn't say that. He says, I don't know in hell where souls go. All I know is he's rotten right there. Does that seem unnecessarily existential for a devout Christian that has just won all kinds of brownie points coming back from the Holy Lands and going on a pilgrimage? How many spiritual brownie points could he rack up, right? Then you'll remember at one point there's a crisis where all the gods are arguing because Diana has said, you got to marry one of them. You got to marry the one that loves you the most. Venus has said, you're going to get the girl. And Mars has said, Arcita, you're going to win the battle and therefore get the girl. Well, those seem to be in contradiction to one another. So there's a big argument, and the one who decides it is Saturn. Saturn. Reek, reek, reek. Does anybody know who Saturn is?
Isn't he like the equivalent to Zeus in Roman like theology?
Well, he's Zeus's dad in Greco-Roman theology. And he's known, it was prophesied that one of his children would overthrow him. So he ate all his children. He ate them. So the one who's going to decide this big controversy that's the heart of the plot is Satan, is Saturn. Any problems with that? And this is him describing the kind of deity he is. My dear granddaughter Venus, said Saturn, my planet has more influence than people know. My influence causes someone to drown in the pale sea. Mine is the person in prison in the dark coat. Mine is someone strangling and hanging by the throat. Mine is the peasants' revolt. Mine is the groaning and the secret poisoning. Mine is the ruin of high halls, grand halls burning. Mine is the falling of the towers and the walls, crushing the carpenter. I slew Samson, pulling down the pillars on top of him and crushing him. I'm the father of pestilence. Are you entirely comfortable him deciding the outcome of this story?
No.
What might the knight be thinking related to religion? Now, let's wait. There's a little bit more. So Saturn is ruling over the gods like Theseus is ruling over the humans. he would seem to be the ultimate authority. And insofar as people actually seeing a character in the story, he is the highest authority in the story. But wait, what happens after this is years go by, and Theseus, who's still the Duke of Athens, he needs an alliance with Thebes. He needs a political alliance with them. And the way that you did political alliances is marriages. So he wants to arrange a marriage with the most important citizen of Thebes, who is Palamon, and he wants to marry her to his wife's sister, so they form an alliance between the cities and they don't go to war anymore. So he gets Palamon together with Emily, and he says, hey, what do you think about a marriage between the two of you? And this is part of his explanation for all that. The prime mover of the universe set everything in motion. When he first made the chain of love, it had an enormous effect, and noble was his intentions. For with the chain of love, he bound the fire, the air, the water, the land, which are called the four elements, within certain boundaries, that they can't exceed those boundaries. That same high prince, that unmoved mover, has established this wretched world certain days' duration for each of us. And after that time that's appointed to us to die, we can't add to that. Who designed all of this except Jupiter, the king, who's the prince and the cause of all things? No one can go against this creature, this Zeus. No one gets off this planet alive. So don't you think it's better wisdom that we make a virtue of necessity, since we can't change the way that things happen, that we can either complain and gripe or make good decisions and go on. If we don't make good decisions, we're in rebellion against the order of the universe, against Jupiter. So Theseus actually argues that there is someone higher than Saturn ruling over all this. It's Jupiter. And Jupiter was always in medieval and Renaissance times the sort of Greco-Roman equivalent of Jehovah God, of the Christian God. So he's saying Jupiter's in charge of all this. So it seems to end in a sort of Christian note. There's one sort of deity who's benevolent, who's over everything. Only problems I see with it is, number one, Jupiter is never in the show. It's Theseus saying Jupiter's in charge of everything, and Theseus has a rhetorical reason to say this because he wants them to marry each other. And so the only evidence of a good God in this show is from the mouth of a politician trying to get what he wants out of it. God bless America, we say, right? So what's the deal, do you think? He is the perfect knight in chivalry. He's the perfect knight in courtly love. Women are just gold digging bachelorettes, right? What's the deal with religion? So if you had to come up with a thesis about the knight and why these elements are in the story, what's your thesis? It's all play, anyone.
Could you say that even like a perfect knight has flawed values.
Okay, that's possible. Then why did Chaucer call him a perfect knight and say specifically that he was perfect in chivalry, courtly love, and religion, or ideal in those?
Is it because he's acting as an unreliable narrator?
Okay, so it's possible that what Chaucer said was wrong, or that what he said was right from his perspective, but we're to see it as ironic. We certainly see the irony when he's describing the monk. We see the irony in the text itself. He was a good fella. He'd let you have one of his concubines. Remember when he says that about the bouncer, the summoner? Remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he will say something and you see the irony in it, and how the Chaucer, the narrator, cannot possibly be right in the passage. Is there anything, if you were to go back to the knight's passage in the general prologue, that screams satire, that shows that he's something other than an ideal knight? Because I don't see it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is there, I mean, I know we had talked about how he went from, he was at like the crusade, and then he immediately went to the pilgrimage.
Good. And that's a question. Why be on crusade and go straight to pilgrimage? Is he trying to atone for something? Did he feel that the crusade didn't give him spiritual brownie points, but somehow was bad or negative? Is that what's coming out in the story? I think it was 1980. Have you ever heard of Monty Python, the
Yes.
comedy troupe?
Yeah.
In 1980, so there's technical difficulties, Martha Grace. Are you okay?
Good now. We had some speaker issues.
Sorry, I did not see that. I was in medias res. I was in the middle of a lecture. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
But anyway, about 1980, I would guess, one of the guys from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, whose name is Terry Jones, he is a medieval nut. I mean, he reads Middle English all the time. He reads things, and he's very interesting and he's very funny. He's done a lot of documentaries, but he's not a very good scholar. And almost all of his books and articles suck. And the reason they suck is because they're just not very scholarly. Oops. But in 1980, he wrote maybe his first one, and it was an article, and it argued that the knight was to be seen as horribly satiric, that Chaucer himself, like Terry Jones, was an atheist and was a pacifist. It's sort of a coincidence that Chaucer and Terry Jones both happen to be atheist pacifists, and that the knight was written in such a way as to undercut courtly love, chivalry, and the Christian religion, and that the knight was secretly an atheist pacifist. Well, I mean, it's something to think about. There is something weird going on. And like a lot of horrible scholarship, what it did is it caused a lot of people to respond by writing really good scholarship since then. And he brings up a great question. Why is the knight behaving the way he's behaving? He pointed out, Terry Jones, that the knight, in fact, all the places he fought were just slaughters, right? They were like Monty Python, blood spurting and so on. But people came along afterwards and said all the places he fought were actually honorable battles, as opposed to someone just doing it for, treacherous reasons. And so people have responded and basically said, we seriously doubt Chaucer was an atheist pacifist. But it does call into question what is going on. Other people have countered the knight has a war weariness, and he comes back and he tells a story that's nominally ideal in those, but contains within them a bitterness. Some people have said he's still exactly the ideal Christian knight he always was, but he is criticizing the Greco-Roman pagan culture that did not have Christianity because Jesus wasn't invented yet. Some people say he's actually extolling the virtues of chivalry by showing what happens, how horribly wrong it goes when two knights right at the beginning crack the code of chivalry by breaking their troth. So critics are all over the map trying to explain why the knight's tale is not ideal. Chivalry, courtly love, and the Christian religion. Questions or comments about all that?